Welcome to Connect to Develop, where we bridge healthcare, strategy, and leadership insights.
Welcome back to Connect to Develop, where healthcare strategy meets bold leadership. I'm Marney Reid, joined by my wonderful co-host, Erika Deleon. Today, we're diving into something every executive, founder, or practice leader has wrestled with, and those are time traps. Not the kind where you waste 10 minutes reviewing reply all emails that are in essence just an FYI that could have been summarized in 5 bullets by the initial senders, but the bigger operational traps that really quietly eat away at growth and momentum.
That's right, Marnie. And this is such an important discussion and one that I'm quite passionate about. What I have found in my work with executive leaders is that the most dangerous time traps aren't obvious ones. They don't show up as missed meetings or bad habits. They really show up as wasted cycles in your operations plan. I would say these are the places where talented teams are working hard, but progress is just not sticking. And I think we could probably both kind of think through some examples. And so today we're going to call out the top 8 time traps that sabotage execution. And we're going to unpack them from 2 angles. I'll walk through operational missteps that's really stall scale. And Marnie will cover the commercial and branding misfires to create noise instead of traction.
Exactly. And time traps don't just slow you down, they really derail commercialization. They can blur your brand message, they can stall strategic execution, and one of the worst things they can do is drain resources that you could be putting towards high impact initiatives. And so while you may think that you're making progress, because in essence, a lot of work is being done, a lot of creativity is being driven, but without that clarity and alignment, you're just spinning your wheels.
That's exactly it. So we are going to jump right in, and I'm going to start with one that seems to creep up. Again, it seems like an obvious one, but these are silent, they creep up, and it's chasing too many priorities. So we're really going to start there. And this is where we see, and it's normal, right? Like leaders love big vision. You know, I love big vision, Marty, you love big vision, and that's critically important. But one of the biggest time traps I see in teams is trying to move everything forward at once. And on paper, this looks ambitious and it looks like a great idea, but in practice, it spreads resources too thin. It really, really does, create an atmosphere where leaders can burn out and really results are diluted. So leaders are often walking into these planning sessions with a list of 15 top priorities or 10 top priorities. And that's really not a strategy. That's what I would call a wish list. And the question I ask, or I encourage that we ask, is what are our top 3 strategic rocks this quarter or goals, whatever operational terminology you use. But if you can't answer that clearly, then your team is going to spend the next 90 days working incredibly hard, but not necessarily working on what matters most. So some practical tips that come up with this first one around chasing too many priorities is using EOS Rocks or OKRs to really help enforce clarity, ranking those priorities in order of impact, because we know if everything is a priority, then really nothing is a priority. And then auditing last quarter's initiatives, really assessing which one drove results, which one stalled, and of course, why.
I love when you give those resources. One of the biggest time traps I see is clearly identifying the target audience and messaging that resonates with them. What I will often see, especially when clients bring me in, is when I look at the messaging and the branding and a lot of either the educational materials or the marketing slicks, I'm not really sure if the person who created it really dug into who is this for and what are the goals? And whether it's a new initiative, a rebrand, a new product or service rollout, I think sometimes people tend to default to a single, almost vague proposition, hoping it'll resonate with everyone. But the issue is when you try to blanket every audience with the same message, you end up with something generic and often misaligned. And so what I recommend is start with the business goal. whether it's the goal that month, for that campaign, for the year overall, and say, what are we really trying to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months with this? Is it growth? Is it customer retention? Is it branding and reputation, or is it an operational lift? And then once you get that, then ask yourselves, what's the next step to get there, and who are the critical people that need to hear it? And really, that's the audience, right? Is who you tailor your message to when your internal and external communications are built around those very specific nuanced details. So yes, a lot of meetings for the internal people, and I'm sure sales sit there and think, just give it to us, we'll run with it. With that amount of clarity, you can stop spinning and you can start gaining real traction. Another trap I see is usually in larger organizations, whereas the smaller, mid-sized organizations don't always have this issue, is messaging by committee. Let me give you an example. You've got 5 key stakeholders, each with their own pet priority. I'm talking internal stakeholders. And so the final draft for the messaging, or for that campaign, or for that program, or that internal meeting has everyone's priority mixed into it. And while I know that political nuances must be thought about, it really should be about the client and the goals at hand. So instead of asking, did we include everyone's input, maybe ask, does this move the goal forward? And when you build messaging around action and not appeasement, if you want to call it, then you get that clarity, you gain momentum, and you really see results. So when you find yourself in this situation, once again, go back to what are the big rocks, what are those 6 to 12 month goals, and the KPIs to achieve them.
This is so good. And that's a really, really good call out. I'm going to keep us moving because I know we have so much to go through. So some others we're going to highlight. The third one. So you just hit on the second one. I'll hit on the third. So mistaking urgency for importance. That is one that is, again, silent, but creeps up. Just because something is loud, urgent or last minute doesn't automatically make it to the top of the priority list, or it's deserving of your resources, your best people's time, or just in general, your team's time, a prime time, because you might be in the middle of driving another priority forward. As someone who's often brought in, and Marney, you and I both, to help move things forward, I've learned to distinguish between what's truly mission critical and what's simply chaotic. And I really try to be mindful not to offload that chaos onto others. And it's even something that I, provide even, guidance, that structure on how to do that appropriately. Because when we're clear on what really matters, we can all work smarter and not just harder. I think that's kind of cliche, but it really, really does matter. Some self-reflection from my own experiences. I would say that I'm a very structured person, or I believe that I am. I set up my time. I work in blocks. I really protect focus time. I build in margin for true urgent things that pop up. And I do that because if I let every fire drill hijack my calendar or other strategic priorities that are not within the scope of work that I'm either supporting executives or my own scope of work, then the overall strategic work really suffers. I would say that aside from setting block categories, one of my favorite tools is the Eisenhower Matrix. It really does help you separate what's urgent from what's actually important. And if it's important, it gets on my calendar. And if it's urgent but not important, it gets delegated or rescheduled or handled in the margin that I've already set aside for that. And that's something that I even work with, that discipline. I've worked with CEOs to just create that discipline within their calendars or their executive assistants to help navigate that. It's a small discipline, but it's how I keep from living in that constant reaction mode, and how I really protect the space for the work that, really moves the needle, not only for myself, but with clients that I partner with.
I'm officially writing a note to myself to look into the Eisenhower Matrix. I think a lot of my previous pickleball partners would like me to get more clarity and focus sometimes. So let's go to number 4 and talk about meetings. And I'm not referring to the productive kind, the ones where you get, a lot of direction, you get great energy, people are aligned, and you move forward and you execute the plan. I'm talking about the other ones, the ones where there's maybe no agenda, maybe there is a very loose agenda, but there's no outcomes, there's no follow through, no one gets assigned anything specific with a due date. And I find that when teams or leadership falls into that trap, not only is it a time suck, and that's where a lot of the memes go around about this, 45-minute meeting could have been 6 emails, it's a strategic drain. Every hour spent circling vague ideas is an hour not producing, not getting intensified on your branding and your messaging, and not executing. And here's the biggest kicker is that internal fog really shows up to your customers. They feel that lack of cohesion, your messaging is muddled, sales reps start to chatter and they start to stall on hitting their quotas, and everything really just loses steam. So the fix is treat these meetings like strategic assets. So clear purpose, define the decision you need to make, assign ownership for next steps, and make sure everyone has reviewed the agenda and any items and educational pieces of content that they need to prior to going in. Because when that internal rhythm is tight and your external presence really gets sharp and your messaging and strategic initiatives hit the goals they were designed to achieve. So some strategies to consider: agenda, ownership, next steps. I can't emphasize this enough. I literally know I'm repeating something that I just talked about a few minutes before, but if I had $1 for every time I came to a meeting and either a clear agenda wasn't set, there wasn't action items for people going in that we need to deliver on these, and there wasn't pieces of information for everyone to review and everyone actually reviewed those going in, I could probably retire and never have to work again. So really look at structuring your framework. Models to consider, one that Erika has brought up on this podcast and others, is the EOS L10s and the OKR check-ins. You can also use a daily stand-up or daily scrum, which is basically a short, focused meeting used in agile project management to keep teams together, aligned, and moving forward. And it's typically held at the same time every day and lasts no more than 15 minutes. So think of it like a huddle, a quick blitz, a check-in, whatever you want to call it. And I personally love getting help from AI assistants, tools like Copilot, Otter, Fireflies, Reid AI to manage the note taking. And this is something that I got tripped up a lot in my early career. Was I was so focused on taking really good notes so that I could retain everything from that meeting, and I knew who owned what action items. I wasn't present. I probably wasn't retaining as much information as I should have been doing. And so these incredible AI assistants can really help keep you in that moment, keep you engaged, and let them spit out all of the action items afterwards. And last but absolutely not least, and I think several people would attest to this who are listening, respecting the time allocated to the topic, whether it's you or someone else. This is hard, but you've got to put these ground rules on timing, because if the topic runs long, then you need to either park it, or you need to say, is this worth taking out some of the other strategic initiatives that we want to talk about on this call? And if so, make sure it's worth it.
I honestly feel that we could do a full podcast extended episode on meetings. I mean, it seems so simple. So I love that you were able to kind of just call out the highlights and some strategies, because I think it's just one that we're continuously always looking to work through and make better, especially with those AI tools that you've referenced. Okay, so let's keep going. We'll move on to number 5. And this one is around, well, I'll say it's underestimating essentialism. I'm going to give a shout out to Greg McKeown, the author of Essentialism, which was a more recent book that I read. And, this book really helped crystallize the concept for me. And the idea is simple, but incredibly powerful. If everything is important, then nothing is important, which I've mentioned previously under one of our other, time traps, but it's a theme, right? Like these are all interwoven. But this book really helped crystallize this. And here's what I see a lot, like leaders and teams chasing 10 different priorities at once, trying to give 100% to each. And it feels productive in the moment, but in reality, we're seeing those resources spread and none of the key initiatives are moving forward or reaching their potential. And that's where we see those bottlenecks. And so essentialism really forces you to ask what is truly essential right now, in the moment, not necessarily in, 3 months or even just a few weeks out, but right now, what is the most important thing, and that not everything is truly on fire and not everything that's loud needs to be a priority. It's a time trap that we see often be in our simple yes. How many times do you find yourself saying yes to everything or yes to too much? And it's trivial or secondary, but it's how we get caught up in this very, very silent time trap. So here's what are some disciplines to help prioritize that again, kind of going back to this book, it just gave me a lot of insight. So kind of checking in quarterly. So those focus checks, again, we're kind of hearing some themes here, picking your top 3 priorities in the moment for the quarter and let the rest be secondary. I'm going to say that again. It's not that everything else is not important. It's just secondary to what's important right now. Decision filters, that's another one to think through. Before saying yes, ask, does this tie back to our strategy or key outcomes? Again, going back to that theme of now, the ones that we're working on right now. And then lastly, empowered no's. Create a culture where leaders can say no to low value work without guilt, because I think sometimes it's the guilt that drives us to think that we have to say yes, but really empowering that no, it is productive in the right context, and that leadership really does demand that from us.
Couldn't agree more. And I will say that saying no is and will most likely continue to be a huge area of needed improvement for me. And I also have to give a huge shout out to, and I can't say enough great things about that book, Essentialism. I actually had a good friend and mentor once tell me that I needed to read it. And I would say that this was probably when I called him for maybe the 10th time that week and just needed to, talk through some items and was really frustrated with things. And I think he could tell that I had been burning the candle at both ends for far too long, and I was burning out very, very quickly. And one of the things that after reading that, I made a commitment to myself and to my personal well-being was figuring out how to say no to the things that weren't vital. And so let's talk about number 6, the shiny object syndrome. Love shiny objects, have this syndrome for sure. I would say that this is one of the great things about a visionary, right? Is that they're idea machines. But if visionaries are left unchecked, they become a huge distraction to the goals of the company. Maybe they hear about a new technology or resource or get called about a potential incredible partnership that can open so many new avenues of sales and revenue, so on and so forth. So they talk to one of the senior leaders, they have them look into it, and then that's where it starts to crumble, because now the leader is diverting their energy and resources from the core strategy, and it's put towards something that may or may not help the overall goals for that company. So the essentialism concept really comes in here and becomes tantamount to accomplishing those big rocks that everyone is already aligned on for the month, for the quarter, for the year. And I think that you cannot say it enough. If everything is important, nothing is important. And the real discipline there is just focus, and not only learning how to say no to your own ideas, but if you are someone who's under a leader, who's a visionary, who's constantly pumping out ideas, to have the strength, the ability, and quite frankly, the levity from your leaders to help them with the no and that's not the vital few. So some simple fixes here, but not easy, as Erika mentioned before. Measure new ideas against impact, effort, and alignment with strategy. If they pass the test, great, execute on them. Create a parking lot for great ideas that are not part of the vital few and adhere to that parking lot. And then just filter relentlessly. Put together maybe even a team that is constantly assessing these activities and challenging on, does this help us move the needle on the current priorities, or is it pulling us sideways? So when leaders practice this kind of essentialism, they empower their teams to practice that kind of essentialism. The noise is really going to settle, and you stop sprinting in 10 different directions, and you all head towards the finish line, and you hit your goals, and hopefully, you celebrate at President's Club at the end.
So many great pearls in all of that. There's just a really good list of strategies going. Okay, we're going to move on to number 7. And this one I think is a big one. Failing to close the loop. And it often looks like this. A decision gets made in a leadership meeting. Everyone nods in agreement or perceived agreement. No one records the ownership. Fast forward 2 weeks later, half the room assumes that it's moving forward. The other half forgot about it. And suddenly the same issue's back on the agenda again, like deja vu. You're having the same conversation on repeat. And this creates 2 problems. One, accountability erosion. People really do stop believing that the meeting matters if nothing is sticking, and they become disengaged, right? And that creates another, domino effect. And then second, cycle waste, the same conversation that keeps replaying over and over without progress. A simple practice is adding reviewing last week's decisions as a standing agenda item. I've often, in meetings that I've run or participated in, I start with that. That really should be the starting point. This is 5 minutes check-in, ensuring everyone knows what was decided, who owns it, and whether it's moving. And that really helps kind of give the team the reassurance that they're not just wasting the time going into this meeting, kind of, again, tying into the meeting section that we talked about. So I'm just going to continue forward with another time trap, and that's overcomplicating the plan. And this is the 8th one that we're covering. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where a 40 slide deck plan is rolled out, but when you stop and ask some questions to the leader, can you explain the strategy in 2 minutes? It's crickets, right? They freeze. And kind of going back to the importance of really simplifying, if your team can't recall the top priorities without pulling that slide deck, the plan is already too complex to execute. And there's a cost to that. There really is a cost. So, overcomplication is, when teams spend more time debating what the plan means instead of executing it, right? So that's a cost. I would also say that leaders getting caught in wordsmithing instead of just moving in the same direction. There's a lot of time that can be spent just on overcomplicating it in that way. And then I would also say the overall progress stalls because no one's really sure what matters most because it's too complicated. And so the best plans are not the shiny, I say shiny binders, but I haven't seen a binder in a long time, but it's not the shiny presentation with, all of the fancy, videos or whatnot, or the really, really long decks. They're simple, visible, and actionable. That's what we're looking for. Something that is tangible, a 1-page strategy map, a short list of the rocks or goals, a handful of KPIs that everyone can center around, that North Star, something that everybody can rattle off in the hallway. It's easy to recall. And that's when execution really does accelerate because people know exactly where they're going and how they're being measured against that success individually and collectively as a team.
Exactly. And you see the same thing on the go-to-market side, really, that complexity killing momentum. And when you're creating the strategy to begin with, the team needs to get super deep into the weeds and assess every aspect of the strategy and execution plan. So we're not saying keep it brief, keep it simple here. That's where you want to get really complex with it. However, once you align on the messaging, the customer, the goals, the timeline, with which to accomplish everything, you roll that out to the rest of the organization. And that's when the message is put together and it's simple. And it takes maybe 3 paragraphs to set it up. And so one of the ways that you can identify if your branding and messaging is simple and if it's clear is could your rep, could a clinician, could a patient repeat it after one conversation when they say, what is it that you do, or what is this initiative, or what are you rolling out? And I think one of the ironies is leaders think sometimes that more details equal more credibility when really it's just creating a lot of noise and it confuses people. And I would say based on 10 years of previous sales experience, Customers don't want dissertation and they don't want a lot of distractions or, to, Erika's point, the shiny binder. They just want a credible source, a trustworthy partner, and they want clarity.
That's exactly it. And I want to add to that, simplicity doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to dumb things down. It doesn't mean that at all, actually. It's boiling it down to the essence so that your people can recall it, repeat it, and then act on it. That's the path that we want our teams to rally around. That's what builds alignment internally and momentum externally. The overcomplication is one of the most common time traps I see. And one of the easiest fixes is once leaders are willing to go the extra layer and help kind of simplify using kind of those techniques that we've gone through, people will respond right away. I mean, people need clarity to move forward. If they're clear, they're going to leave the office, they're going to leave the meeting, and they're going to move forward with their agenda and their part of the strategy that they're leading. So, okay, we have gone through quite a bit. We've gone through 8 time traps, and we hope that, and I'm sure that there are others, but those are ones that we've unpacked today. So we really, really hope that this was valuable. So we have, if you kind of look at the summary, we've covered everything from chasing too many priorities to messy meetings, overcomplicating the plan. But here's the thing I want to emphasize. None of these time traps are permanent. And so if you are a founder, an executive, or even an emerging leader that is listening in, you can start shifting this tomorrow. We've provided a ton of not only resources and readings that you can go to, but some tactical ways to do this. Protecting your focus, simplifying your plan, putting a structure around how your team spends time. Those small but critical adjustment has compound into huge wins. And remember, your budget, your systems, your leadership bandwidth, they are all going to reflect what you value most. Making sure that there is alignment on where you actually want to go is going to be the critical component here. So we really, we're so excited about unpacking. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. We're so grateful. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Connect to Develop. We love these conversations. We love to hear what time traps you've experienced and some of the solutions that have worked for you. So feel free to comment when this is posted. And until next time.
You can find more interviews on our YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.